afternoon. I'm glad you all could join us tonight. My name is Sally Hopley. I am the Sustainability Coordinator for Metropolitan Community College, and I'm delighted to welcome you to the 7th presentation of the Hubbard Sustainability Series. The goal of the Hubbard Sustainability Series is to showcase dynamic sustainability experts to the entire community. To achieve this goal, MCC at DoSpace has developed a series of presentations, each featuring sustainability superheroes and providing them at no cost to the viewing public. So let me please introduce our next speaker. It is Gary Oppenheimer, which I'm sure you have probably deduced is the gentleman sitting here on my left. Gary Oppenheimer is the founder and executive director of AmpleHarvest.org. Aware of the increasing hunger problem in 2009, and after seeing the amount of wasted food in the community garden as well as other gardens around the country, Gary created AmpleHarvest.org, a nationwide program enabling America's 42 million homes and community gardeners to donate their excess bounty to thousands of food pantries nationwide. A year after founding AmpleHarvest.org, Gary was named a CNN hero, and he was introduced on the Larry King Live show and had an interview with CNN anchor Ali Velshi. AmpleHarvest.org also worked closely with former First Lady Michelle Obama's Let's Move initiative. Gary has also been named a World Food Prize nominee, is a James Beard Foundation Food Waste Advisory Board member, and won the Russell Berry Foundation's Making a Difference Award. Gary resides in the mountains of northern New Jersey. He is a master gardener, Rutgers environmental steward, former community gardener, director, environmental commissioner in northern New Jersey, an avid gardener and long-distance cyclist. He also enjoys boating, hiking, farming, and attacking challenges of all sorts. He is a firm believer in the notion that to do the impossible, you must first believe it isn't. Please welcome me in joining Gary. There we go.
Yeah. I want to thank you, first of all, Beth, thank you. It was a great talk. Thank you very much. It's not too loud, is it? All right. I'm not here. Okay. I'm going to ask everybody to take out your phones later, so it's okay. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm delighted to be here at Metropolitan Community College. I'm thrilled that the Hubbard Foundation is inviting me to come out, so thank you very much. And I also want to give a shout out to the sound folks in the back. You guys have been amazing, so thank you very, very much. Yeah, and you deserve it. And we'll hope the technology is going to continue to work just great. Yes, it does. So Beth and I did not collaborate on our presentations, but you're going to see an overlap in some places between what she's talked about and shown and what I'm talking about, which just shows that what she's talking about is super important. All right, I got it. I got it figured out. Okay, so we're going to be, thank you, that's my bad. I apologize. It's not you guys. See, they were correct. This is the title slide. So we're going to walk you through what we're going to be talking about and then take you into there. So the first, we're going to talk about food waste, a bit more depth than Beth had talked about. I'm then going to talk about a program that's 10 years old that I founded in May of '09 called AmpleHarvest.org, which is going to be a different piece of food waste. We're then going to be talking about a different program tackling food waste from an entirely different perspective, dealing with the faith community. Then from there, I want to talk a little bit about what you and I can be doing to end the waste of food. But to start with, now, you may be laughing a bit, but my wife is a firm believer in the idea of dessert first because you never know. So, and also I'm a believer in the idea that impact should precede process. You should see where we're going to, and then we're going to get you there. So I decided to show you this video and to let you see, this is one of many news stories that's been out about AmpleHarvest.org. I wanted you to see this because Beth's organization is running around critically getting food that's been left over from stores and restaurants and whatever. We've taken entirely a different approach, going after food that up to now actually nobody's actually looked at. There we go. So let's take a quick look at food waste, and there'll be a little bit of repetition from Beth's and some different, but I want to reframe it because food waste does sound like pig slop and sounds like something unappealing. But the reality is we should be thinking about it as the waste of food. This is stuff you would want to eat, you would have eaten, but for some reason it didn't get consumed. This picture by Bill Marsh, New York Times, 2008 was a game changer for me. It represents, it's a photograph shaped in the map of the US, and it represents the amount of food lost by a family of 4 in a month. That's about a pound a person a day. This got me thinking. Now, admittedly, I also grew up with my grandmother saying, finish what's on your plate, kids are starving in Europe. So there have been all these pieces in my life, but this was a very critical tipping point for me. And interestingly, you use this is the Rose Bowl. Now, Jonathan Bloom, who's a leading expert on food waste here in America, when he wrote his book, American Wasteland, used the metaphor of we could fill the Rose Bowl every day with food waste. About 2 months ago, I had a call with the EPA for the FAITH program that we're going to be talking about, and they said, we're not sure about this food waste thing because we have no metrics to describe that. So I got on the phone with John, and I said, Jonathan, is this food waste connection, is the Rose Bowl still filled up every day with the waste of food? And he said, not really. When he did the computations, when he wrote the book more than a decade ago, it was nearly 2 Rose Bowls a day already back then, and it has since gotten worse. So today we are filling more than 2 Rose Bowls a day, which is around the 700 stadiums that Beth had talked about. This is the amount of food that we Americans are throwing away, wasting, a missed opportunity on a daily basis, year after year after year. So, you've heard these numbers. 40% of the food in America is not consumed. 50% of the produce in America is not consumed, which means, by the way, that since half our produce comes from California, and California is already sucking the ground dry in water, we're really wasting literally 12.5% of California's water, and they can't afford it. Much of the farmland is not consumed. But again, we're really down to about a pound a person a day in the waste of food. And this is happening all over the place. It's in your town dump. This is easy to see. It's happening. How many of you go apple picking? And maybe, I don't know how big it is out here in the mid, okay. Where I live in northern Jersey, apple picking is really big. And one of the things is no matter what you do, you go to a farm, you go apple picking, and no matter how many apples are on the ground, you only feel good picking an apple out of a tree. The apples on the ground may have fallen 2 minutes ago. They're perfectly edible, they're perfectly wholesome, they're great, and you're not going to pick them up. There's a component of food waste that we all have, even those of us in the fight. And so this is a typical example of the waste of food. This is behind your supermarket. And this is not because the food is bad, but it's because the next shipment of food came in and they have to do something with it. And while you have wonderful rescue organizations in many, but not all communities that are rescuing the food, much of it still goes out. And as Beth said, many of them, it's some lawyer saying, you can't do that because they're ignoring the Emerson Food Safety Act. But we all have a piece in this also. I mean, we all have portion sizes that are too big. Before I came here, I went to Potbelly's near here to get lunch, and I wanted a salad, and I was perfectly happy with their small salad. And they said, we can't give you, it has to be the big one. You can only get the small one if you also get a sandwich of soup to go with it. They forced me into a food waste scenario. Thank you for the props. Project Drawdown, it is an amazing book. It's been out now about a year, and it looks at the top solutions the world can use to reduce the climate change. Number 3 out of all of the options is to reduce the waste of food. Why? The food we throw away when it goes to a landfill, pound for pound, breaks down into methane, which pound for pound is the equivalent of between 20 and 30 pounds of CO2 in the atmosphere. So when we're throwing away billions of pounds of food, we're throwing billions of pounds of climate change gas into the air. So from the beginning of the food waste issue, many have looked at it. It's the USDA, the EPA, REFED, NRDC, many, but there's been one thing that hasn't been looked at. So I have a question by show of hands. How many of you are gardeners or know gardeners or live with a gardener? Look around for a minute how many hands are up. Keep your hands up just for a minute, please, just so everybody can see. Statistically, gardeners are 35% of America, and this room is even a higher percent. Nobody ever thought about the garden food waste. You already had your hands up. I skipped the slide. So it's 42 million gardeners. That's 35% of all households, a significant percentage of urban. This is not just out in the burbs in rural America. And it's rapidly growing, particularly with millennials. And again, I want to underscore, this is not about farmers. This is about people who simply like to garden, tomatoes, zucchini, or what have you. And they have a place in their backyard or wherever they might be, in a community garden. It might be in a rooftop garden. It might be in any setting in which they're gardening. We're all guilty of largely the same thing. We grow too much food. And I got to tell you personally, I live in northern New Jersey. Like here, you have pretty nasty winters. And by late February, you're really getting pretty itchy to start getting out there, and the ground's not ready, but you start planting indoors. You'll see pictures in a minute what it looks like. And we plant more than we can use. And to make matters worse, although the plants, like the tomatoes, don't all ripen through the year, they all ripen in the same, like 6 to 8 weeks. So you're swamped with the food. So this is me, not in a jacket, but this is me in my garden. And that's my dining table around this time in February, and every one of those cups that you see there is a seedling that's going to be put into the ground. This is what my dining table looks like. We don't eat in the dining room for a while in late winter. This is what my kitchen and dining room and everything looks like when the harvest starts. And these are daily harvests in my garden. And I am a master gardener, but there are gardeners who are far more prolific than me. And there are people who have soil far better than I do. Collectively, the average gardener is growing in excess of 400 pounds of excess food per year. And that might be mind-boggling if your gardening is only giving you 2 tomatoes in a year. But for many of us, it's great. And there are many people who just have the 2 tomatoes or 1 zucchini, and you're happy, and that's great. But the bulk of the gardeners are growing a lot of food, and that's me. So you're going to be asking the question, well, how much garden waste is there? And it's a reasonable question, because remember, I told you that everybody has studied farm-to-table garden loss, food loss. And it's it's in the many, many billions of pounds. But nobody ever walked into your backyard and said, are you growing anything? Are you wasting what you're growing? How much are you growing? It's, nobody's ever done that. The National Gardening Association, by the way, does survey gardeners across America, and they came up with the numbers of 42 million gardeners, 35% of the population. Interestingly, they don't look at what you're growing and how much you're growing and how much you're wasting. So somebody had to do it. So ampleharvest.org did. Starting in 2015 and then in 2016, we asked 2,500 gardeners across America a bunch of questions. What do you grow? How much do you grow? How much more food do you grow than you could use, preserve, or share with friends? Would you donate it if you could? Would you grow more if you could? And many other questions. The data was fascinating, and there was a lot of data. So we learned that 95% of the people who garden grow food. Now, the other 5% are just growing ornamentals, flowers, but the majority, and even people who grow flowers also grow food. Everybody grows tomatoes. One person admitting to growing marijuana. I have to tell you, I don't remember if their data stayed in our data sets or not, but everybody grows tomatoes, and then you got all these other things that people grow. Would you donate food if you knew a local food pantry would accept it? And this is an important question, because not only is the issue of how much food is there, but what would you as an individual do with it if you had the opportunity? 4 out of 5 gardeners said, yes, if I knew I could donate food and there was a place to which I would donate it, I'd be eager to donate it. By the way, in principle, this is not any different from you with old clothing. When you don't want it anymore, you don't throw it away. You're a good person. You take it to a thrift shop, because that's what your parents told you to do, and there's a thrift shop in the town. Same principle of just being good. Would you deliberately grow more food if you knew you could donate it? This is no longer a food waste question. This is actually outright charity now. Because I don't know about you, but I've never used all the tomato seeds in the packet, because they may give you 25, 30 seeds and only want 10 plants. Many people would deliberately grow more. Where are you located? That urban is a significant percentage of the population and rapidly growing. In New York, at least, I'm sure many other parts of the country, rooftop gardening is going gangbusters. One of the largest farms in southern New York is in a rooftop in Brooklyn. It's acres large. So we gathered up all of this information, and then our friends at Cisco Systems took the numbers and came back with data that just stunned me. I knew there was a lot of food. I knew that there was a lot of need for a program, but I just didn't understand the scope and the magnitude. So rather than throw big numbers at you, lots and lots of numbers, I'll just throw some big ones at you. Collectively, the gardeners of America are growing 11. By the way, all this is online. If you want to see ampleharvest.org/study, it's all publicly available. 11 billion pounds of food. That's food that we can't use or preserve or share with friends. The food itself would be worth $18 billion if they were farmers, was retail value. $115 impact on the nation's healthcare costs. If people across America had that food, instead of it being thrown away, the value that would be derived from their improved health would be the equivalent of $115 billion. But the big number is that the gardeners of America grow enough excess food to feed 28 million hungry people. Now, it's not that, you have to bear in mind that unlike farms where we have millions of farms, in gardening, we have 42 million. It's a huge multiplier effect. So, May of 2009, I launched a program called ampleharvest.org, and that is its real name, it's also the URL. And the idea of it was, well, to tackle the issue of the fact that we have 42 million people, and this is a real gardener. She's also a roller derby person, but people like her who garden. And as you saw in Beth's presentation, we have 42 million people who go to food pantries across America, and typically they go to a pantry that's only got processed food, no fresh food. Here's the kicker. The people who are gardening and the people in the community who need the food are neighbors. They live side by side. They're not on the other side of the railroad tracks type of stuff. These are our neighbors. This could be somebody in this room who maybe lost a job, fell in economic hard times, and you had to go to a food pantry for a while. The reality is the people who have more food than they can use and the people who need the food are living side by side in the community. And I saw this as an amazing opportunity for America. Now, my background's in technology. I was one of the early geeks in computers back in the 70s. I did a prototype email system in 86 or 87. I invented the electronic newsletter, but I can promise you I did not invent spam. That was somebody else. So my background's in technology. And I had figured out that there was a thing that I could bring these two things together, these two people together, not directly but indirectly. And the result was ampleharvest.org. Now, to take this to the next step, I have to explain a little bit of the architecture of the food bank system and of the food system in America. So you've all heard of Feeding America. It's the center of the food bank network in the country. And connected to that are around 200 food banks. Now, except for Oregon and Washington, food banks are not the place where a hungry family goes. Food bank's a big warehouse, and that's a regional collector of food and redistributor of food. And connected to the food bank are food pantries, soup kitchens, battered women's shelters. That's where hungry families go. So that's the architecture. And if you look at the presentation there, you're going to see that the food would typically go to the food bank, sit there for days or weeks, get to a food pantry, and then go to hungry families. The problem is that works just great for jars and cans and boxes, but it does not work for fresh food. You can't have lettuce or tomatoes sitting on shelves for weeks. It doesn't work. And that choke point was the fundamental problem that I saw. So the result is that people like Sean, real gardener, Texas, was sending his excess food into a compost pile because he wasn't allowed to donate the food. When you're going to solve a problem, you first have to figure out what the real problem is. And I looked at this as not a food problem. I saw it very, very differently. For example, have any of you gone down the street and seen a sign like this? I don't think so. And the reason is the sign doesn't exist. You can't find the food pantry. There's no sign outside saying there's a food pantry out there. Now, mind you, things are beginning to change a little bit with the internet, but back 10 years ago, we were still in the yellow pages days, and Google was a lot smaller than it is now, but you didn't know where a food pantry was. But the other problem, you have to get close, by the way, to see the food pantry. You have to get that close. But the other problem is the food drives themselves that we've all gone to and probably almost all of us have donated to. We've all been given the same admonition: jars, cans, boxes, no fresh food. We gardeners have been told your fresh food is not welcome. And the reason it wasn't welcome is because that time process from the food bank to the food pantry, they could only take the processed food. So what I had realized was that fundamentally the problem that we were dealing with and the problem that had to be tackled was misinformation and missing information. The misinformation was jars, cans, boxes, no fresh food. The missing information was to where can I donate it and when can I donate it. This was an information problem. This was not a food problem. The food was the victim of the information problem. So in March of '09, I woke up and I had an epiphany. And this was while I was working as a director of community garden. I realized this is solvable. And I sat down at my computer and mapped out in a PowerPoint presentation over a 4-hour session what I visualized a solution could look like. And it turned out I nailed it. What I realized was I needed to tell people, yes, you could donate food. I needed to build a search engine that enabled them to donate the food and then get out of their way. And the result was that once the gardener knew that she could donate the food, and I say she because 70% of gardeners in America are women 35 to 85 years old, even though Sean isn't a she. But once you knew that you could donate food and to where, the problem of the waste of food from your garden was permanently solved. And the lack of fresh food in America's food pantries was permanently solved. Because once you knew that you could donate the food and to where, you could do that for the rest of your gardening life. So I built ampleharvest.org with the assistance of 2 volunteers, one of whom was a woman who I have never met, and she herself lived in Section 8 housing. She simply said, I'm in, I'm doing this with you. So the 3 of us built this, and in 7 weeks later, ampleharvest.org was rolled out. I should say it happened that fast because no lawyers were involved, so there's a lesson for anybody who wants to. I hope I'm not insulting any lawyers here. But that's how it all worked. So the idea was a database of food pantries in which the pantries themselves sign up, by the way. We're not just combing information. Pantries come and they actually sign up, say, we want the food. They put in their information, so you're the gardener. You put in, I live here, a list of the pantries nearest you come up with the information on a map and a listing. Then you put in, you pick the one you want, then up comes the information that you need to donate the food. There's one magical piece of information in here that I should add that it dawned on me while we were doing this process, and that is date and time of donation. If a food pantry is opened only 1 day a week, Sundays, and you show up on Monday, that food has to sit there for a week before anybody's going to see it, and it's not good. But what if you were told, we would like to have you come on a Sunday morning before noon, because we distribute the food on Sundays starting at noon. The result is you now know when to harvest the food, Sunday morning, Saturday night, you donate the food, it's sitting on a table for a little while, and then your hungry neighbors come in later that day to pick it up and it goes home. They're getting food fresher than you and I can get in the supermarket, and by the way, there's an ethical element in here because it's plausible. And I say neighbors, I mean literally, your next door neighbor, maybe the person eating the food. It would be bad for you to show up with food while they're getting it. You're embarrassed, they're humiliated. This separates the two of you by an element of time. There's anonymity in there, which I thought was really important. So this is what it looked like when food started coming in to food pantries. So it was launched in May of '09, as I said. The first pantry signed up in New Jersey, because that's where I live. And then this is what happened. Now, if I have the number that I wrote down before I came up here, here we go. The current number, as of when we started this afternoon, was 8,556 food pantries in all 50 states in America are part of ampleharvest.org. That's a quarter of all the food pantries in America. The most recent one was around 11 a.m. this morning in Floyd, Virginia. This is a real-time growth of an opportunity to reduce food waste and to basically nourish America. So what happens is after ampleharvest.org gets launched, I start getting asked questions about the food, and I had to start telling people that this was, well, we had to discuss the question a little differently. So keeping this map in your mind for a minute. Oop, pushed the wrong button. There we go. That's what I wanted. I want you to think about how it works. So we're going to put one pin on the map here in Omaha, and we're going to call that a food pantry. Imagine a circle around that food pantry, 9 miles, 20-minute drive in most places. I thought 20 minutes is a reasonable distance gardeners would be willing to drive to donate food. They're not going to drive 2 hours. It's not worth the time or the gas. Think of this 250 square mile funnel of food coming into food pantries. All right? The question isn't how much food did people get, how much food did the pantries get. The real question, I thought, was how much food was no longer being wasted. This is a supply side problem. The demand side at the pantries are the beneficiaries, but the ultimate is the supply side. Now, by the way, this is the real map of what we currently have in Omaha. So it wasn't one pin. We have a bunch of pantries, and there are probably many more we have to work at getting in. You folks may be able to help us with that. So what happened next was this.
Millions of hungry Americans rely on food pantries to eat.
I'm sorry, Larry Sink wasn't
But often that means a diet of canned and
voice
processed food. So when this week's CNN hero saw that local pantries were lacking fresh produce, he came up with a simple way to help. Found it in his own backyard. Watch.
Pancake mix and syrup.
The system we have in America is you donate canned goods or dry goods to a food bank. Fresh produce is almost never available. Horseradish. I had an idea about how to not waste food. We're having an ample harvest, and the very least we can do is give it to people who need it.
They'll be enjoying this tomorrow at the pantry.
AmpleHarvest.org enables people who grow food in home gardens to easily find a local food pantry to donate their excess produce to.
It's a nice big one. We didn't know what doors to knock on, but now that Gary has got this wonderful program, there's some rhubarb. Taking it to one of the pantries really is a good way to share with Ample Harvest.
AmpleHarvest.org gives them the ability to easily get that food to somebody who genuinely really needs it.
Does it smell good? Yeah.
You're not only doing good, you're feeling great about it.
It was pretty cool, I have to say. So this is an example, by the way, of a donation food from urban Bridgeport, Connecticut. As I said, this is not just about the burbs or rural America. Florida and in other places, food that just comes into the system. This is what it looks like at a food pantry when it's laid out on a table for hungry families to pick up and to go home. So in short, what I did is a program that bypassed the choke point at the food banks and allowed the food to flow directly to the food pantry. From millions of gardeners to thousands of food pantries to benefit millions of hungry people. This is what happens when America stops wasting food. Now, remember this map of a moment ago. At a certain point, this is what happened.
The response to this initiative has been overwhelming. I mean, all kinds of faith communities have been stepping up. Muslim community leaders are hosting sports tournaments to encourage young people to get active. The Jewish Community Centers Association is working with JCCs around the country to grow gardens and to get fresh food in underserved areas. And they're creating early child wellness programs. Groups like the National Council of Churches have joined with an organization called Ample Harvest to help gardeners donate fresh produce to 4,700 of their local food pantries.
So that map, one of the numbers that is important in this whole food sphere is that 70% of food pantries are in a house of worship. So this makes a natural partnership between a food waste program like AmpleHarvest.org and the faith community of all faiths. So in 2016, we launched a program called Food Waste Weekend. I'm going to just ask a question that you can raise your hands if you want. For those of you who belong to any house of worship of any faith, I'm sure your faith leader has spoken to you about feeding the hungry. Yes? Raise your hands if yes. Okay, good number. So this is what my hair often looks like when it's not too good. Typically what happens when food waste advocates are speaking to people out in the public, the majority of the people are focused on other things. They're trying to pay their bills. They're trying to do all sorts of other things. They're not hearing us. But I realized that once a week, people go to a house of worship and listen to their faith leader. Once a week, there's an opportunity to have their undivided attention, and we could build on that. We could, since we're already working with the faith community, we could better get to the people of faith. We created a program that's called Food Waste Weekend, and the idea was for the Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, Unitarian, and non-sectarian faith community, like secular, well, to get involved in food waste. We created a sermon, a secular sermon, or what I like to tell people is a faithy sounding but faithless sermon. And that was it. It talked about food waste, it talked about climate change, and then we had it translated into Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, and Unitarian. Then we went to the clergy of all faiths across America and increasingly globally, and we said, we got a program for you. You can learn about food waste from all the experts. We'll give you everything you need. We're then going to give you a sermon written in your own faith tradition, and we're going to give you calls to action, like portion sizes and date labeling, for example. And then we're going to encourage you to give the sermon. We're going to give you all the other material you need. Do a sermon on food waste as part of your regular service all in the same weekend, so that on Friday, imams, Saturday, rabbis, Sunday, priests and ministers would actually be talking about the same issue, which, by the way, is not only then talking about food waste, but to have these different faiths all talking about the same thing at the same time is great in a very divisive time in America. It sends a really good message. So that instead of somebody like me just speaking and being heard by a small number of people, you have a faith leader being heard by everybody in their congregation. That was Food Waste Weekend. So it was built as a program to help clergy. This year we made a variant of it to help people of faith. In other words, people who don't go to house of worship, for example, that they could go in. And all this is available at foodwasteweekend.org. It's one of our education programs. So I'm going to quickly, very quickly, because I know my time is running short, tell you what these calls to actions were so you could see them. The first one, of course, is donate garden produce. The second one was learn how to store your fruits and vegetables a lot better, and so they don't get wasted. And one hint is don't let them get out of sight in your refrigerator. If they do, you'll never see them again. Keep a food log. Keep track of what you're wasting. Learn more, get involved, learn about the issue of the waste of food itself. Learn about deep dive. Beth was talking about that. I want to give you one quick example. For those of you who have honey at home, go look at the bottom. There's an expiration date on it. Honey has a 20,000-year shelf life. This is not about the safety of anything. This is about time to buy some more. Share with other people what you learn about food waste. You saw those plates I showed you. Portion size. Take only what you need, serve less, go back for seconds if you want it. That's a huge benefit both to the waste of food and, frankly, all of our own wastes. Go shopping with a shopping list so you don't buy more than you need. And donate food when you move. There's a wonderful program, by the way, called Move for Hunger, which works with moving companies around the world. So when you leave the house, you buy a new house, and you take the, the furniture, the clothing, the dog, and maybe the kids, but you leave the food behind. The moving company will take the food and get it donated for you. This is not something you can do alone. This is something that I learned requires engaging with other people, telling people, reaching out to them, and having them join you in the effort. And so this is where your involvement comes in. We've gotten 25% of the pantries in America on ampleharvest.org. We have 75% more to go, and we could use your help with that. But there are other ways that you can help. Innovative programs struggle with the support that they need to do their work. We don't fit conventional structures in terms of how we approach a problem. People like to feed hungry people. My answer is we like to get hungry people fed. It's a different way of viewing it. This is a social program, not a food program. The food is the beneficiary of it. And lastly, the idea of having hunger and environment merged together is something that's relatively new. So finding the people, the enterprises, the businesses that want to help support a program like this is super critical. This is where I'm going to ask all of you, if you would please take out your phones for a minute. And I'd love, you can either, if you can do a QR code, that's great. If you can't, go to ampleharvest.org/me, M-E. We'd love to know who you are. We'd love to stay in touch. I promise you none of your information is going to be shared with anybody else. But it allows us to remain engaged, to hear from you as to your ideas, and to have you basically to have you part of this larger effort. So I'll keep that up just there for another moment. All right, so I'm going to move on from there. So ways that you can get involved, got it. Thank you. look at different ways in your life that you can reduce the waste of food. And by the way, again, what Beth talked about, where a hotel got beaten up by its customers, when you go into a restaurant that serves you too much, when you're going to an event that's served, tell them how you feel, because that makes a difference, and they'll start to corporately behave differently and behave better. And just for the record, the Emerson Food Safety Act says that if food is given to a nonprofit, the donor is indemnified, except for gross negligence. Anything a lawyer says saying we can't do this is just total nonsense. Urge your local food pantry, wherever you live, to join ampleharvest.org. It's four things they need to know. It's free, they don't need refrigeration, they don't need storage, and it's free. Say the free part twice. That's really super important to them. Tell your gardening friends in all 50 states about this. We're running out of the gardening season now, but they're going to start planting in a few months as the winter winds down. I'm not even thinking about winter yet, but yeah. Let more and more people know about ampleharvest.org. You can support us with a sign up, making donations however you feel is comfortable for you. We work with corporations, businesses to sponsor an entire state. My shirt that you can't see under here actually says Virtual Roots. This is where an enterprise can have their name on all the food pantries in a state. And we actually have a program we're rolling out right now. We do it every year, Centerpieces for Pantries. This is, and I'm asking you, as you get ready for your Thanksgiving dinner, your Christmas dinner, what have you, for those of you who would normally put out arrangements of flowers and stuff on your dinner table, which will just then get moved out of the way so you can talk to the people across from you, put out an arrangement of whole fruits and vegetables instead. Whether you grew it or you bought it's irrelevant. Don't cut, don't pierce, don't slice, just the whole stuff. Whatever is pretty, that's your centerpiece. Then you can donate that the next day to a food pantry. So that food can grace your table one day and feed another family the next. It's environmentally better than flying flowers from South America, and it's better nutritionally for the community, and you're also making a statement to the people that you're sharing your event with. You can learn more at ampleharvest.org/local. Jen Chapin is Harry Chapin's daughter, and this is her description of us. It's something beautifully simple and simply beautiful. I was very, very moved by that. So this is the end of my presentation, but I'm going to throw an option at you because we next go to a break, and then we come back for Q&A. I was supposed to do a colloquium before this event. I donate a colloquium to colleges and universities when I'm invited out to speak, and this is usually when I meet with students and I tell them some of the ideas of what they can do to improve the world based on what I learned, both lessons and mistakes. And so we have a few minutes, so I'm going to ask by a show of hands. We have two choices. We can go to the break, or if you want to give me 5 minutes and learn about the theory of change behind ampleharvest.org, just raise your hand if you want to have that. And if others will go to the break. So who wants to see a few more slides or not? That's a yes. Okay, this will be quick. So the theory of change behind ampleharvest.org, and this can be applied to many other nonprofits, by the way, not many other problems, is, as I said, first you have to find and solve problems. I don't believe in feeding people. I believe in fixing systems so that people aren't hungry anymore, for example. So the change occurs when there's a systemic and sustained change that enables people to do what they always want to do. Gardeners always wanted to donate their food but couldn't. You enable them to donate it, and the problem is solved. Faith leaders have been talking about feeding the hungry, but never thought about food waste, even though it's in the scriptures. Give them what they need, and the problem is solved. This is how I believe you can actually do it. So to affect change in whatever endeavor, whatever problem you're trying to solve, is number one, figure out what the real problem is. I discovered this was misinformation and missing information in terms of the gardeners. Find the people who already care about the issue. Give them more information. Beth alluded to that already. Enable them to do that. Give them the tools, and I find that doing it online is best because it can scale all over the place. And then get out of their way. But the last thing I think is make it scalable where you can. If you can do something that works in any community, in every community, you accomplish the greatest potential there. So this is the theory of change that brought ampleharvest.org. And the reason to do it this way, particularly the scaling stuff, is by scaling, you eliminate duplication. You don't have the same program replicated in many communities across the country. The same mistakes are not repeated. The same lessons you've learned can be applied every place else. And it's much, much more efficient to scale. And it assures you of sustained impact. So the question is, are you really solving a problem just reacting to it? Are you solving it the right way? Or maybe are you looking at solving the wrong problem? And these are questions you need to ask yourself before you start attacking a problem. So I want to thank you all very, very much. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to all of you. And again, I appreciate the foundations inviting me and the college inviting me. And we're both going to be here for questions after the break. So thank you very, very much. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started with our Q&A tonight. So this first question is actually for the both of you. Among prospective donors, what is the most common reason for saying no? No, I don't want to donate. No, this isn't right for me.
Hello. Food or money donation?
Good clarification. I believe it's food.
I don't think gardeners have ever said, I'm not going to do it. Unless, well, no, I'm going to stand corrected. There is an issue. Transportation. You may be a gardener, you've been gardening your whole life, you have a very prolific garden, but you're no longer driving, for example. How are you going to get to food to a food pantry if you're not driving? That's a real problem. Not with the majority, but with a significant number of people. I actually reached out to both Lyft and to Uber and have not heard back, because I'd love to have a partnership like one of those companies to say, for a discounted rate, we'll take the garden food, or we'll take the garden food and the gardener to the food pantry. So that piece of it's not that I won't donate, it's I'm unable to donate, but if I had the opportunity, I would.
You need a saving grace. We go to a lot of different church organizations that have big gardens during the season, and then they have their pantry for their church people that on Sunday, and then on Monday morning we pick up the excess. So I think just finding if there's a food rescue, because a lot of it is, it's not a production problem, it's a distribution as always. With Saving Grace, ours is probably with especially grocery stores. We have quite a few, the ones that have local permission, or they're from locally here, but we always hear, well, corporate says no, well, corporate says no. So, or we're already donating to the food bank. Well, that's a different thing than what we're going after, and there's so much more that we could be getting. So it's getting to corporate, and we've done that in a few instances, but we need to do it more.
Let me just follow up on one thing. She was absolutely right. A saving grace would be great. The problem is we're in 4,000 communities across America, and there's one saving grace. But there's also programs across America like this, but in the vast majority of America, that's not there yet. And so that can, for most of the gardens, would continue to be a problem.
Great, thank you. As we do appreciate what you're both doing for donated food, but can you give your top two examples or education points on how folks can reduce their food waste in their homes? So reaching that first part of the food waste hierarchy to reduce in the home. You have a top two.
You want to go first?
Well, it's not bringing it into the home unless you have plans to eat it. I think you alluded to that too, Gary. Making your list and staying with it. It's probably the biggest one. And it's probably learning how to package your food better too, so it could store longer, and again, having it where it's, you know what's there.
I'm going to give you an unpopular answer, and I know it's unpopular because I've shared this with a bunch of my female friends and not one of them likes it. Put a foam block or something, or even empty milk carton in the back of the top shelf of your refrigerator. When you put food in the refrigerator, it's there, you see it, you're going to use it. And the next time you go shopping, the food that was in the refrigerator gets pushed back a little bit with the new food that comes in. And the food that's out of sight is no longer visible, and that's left, and it goes further and further back and eventually gets thrown away because out of sight, out of mind. And my thinking was, if you put a block of something in the back so there's no space to push stuff back in the top shelf, that problem tends to go away. It's not a very popular answer, but mechanically would work. If the food is in sight, I think you're more likely to eat it. You're not going to buy food that you already have. And the second one, I'm a firm believer in portion sizes, seriously. Dinner plates have gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. Smaller portions are simply better for you, and the food you throw away is actually costing you a fortune. I mean, a typical family is spending $2,000+ a year on the food that they throw away. So smaller portion sizes reduces the waste of food, it's healthier for you, and that's easy and nobody objects to that. So I would simply tell people to buy smaller plates, or maybe serve dinner not on a full dinner plate, but on the next step down, and see if that helps.
Great. So the next question has to do with when the food gets to a home. So something's been donated, someone comes and pick it up. But can you talk a little bit about education for the folks once they have that food? What kind of efforts do you recommend or are currently happening to make sure that folks know how to cook what they receive?
Well, I know some of our schools, especially the inner city schools, they're doing some cooking classes there. We also had Cooking Matters here in town that they were going out. But I think there needs to be a lot more on that, especially if it's produce or something that they're not used to. So, yeah, a lot of that could step up.
Let me start by
Oh,
saying...
and No More Empty Pots, I'm sorry. No More Empty Pots does that too.
Bread.org is a great organization, and they have programs to send chefs to food pantries and help people learn to cook. But in the space that we're in, which is fresh food, and I can tell you because I grow a lot of my own stuff, there's almost nothing that you grow that you can't eat raw. Yeah, you have to cook potatoes and a few other things, but much of the stuff you eat raw, there's no cooking involved. There's no how to prepare it. You simply eat it. I mean, that's what most of you humans did for millennia. So with fresh food, there's not that much, I think, that needs to be done. Now, even if there is something that needs to be done, it's not our mission. And I was just talking to somebody else here a little bit about that. We don't tell people how to cook, and we don't tell people how to grow. There are other wonderful organizations doing both. Our very narrow focus is on helping the gardeners get connected to the pantries and opening that floodgate of food. So, but I will say that if people don't know what to do, my answer to most of them is ask your grandmother. She knows, and she'll tell you how. And see, I'm being very serious about this. Ask somebody in your family who's been around a bit longer. They'll tell you what to do with the food.
Beth, this next question is just for you. Do you sort the different types of food before you deliver?
We do not. Well, our drivers know what each of the nonprofits could use. So when a nonprofit applies, we go out and look to see what type of facilities they have. Are they a pantry? Do they feed in-house? Do they have refrigeration? Do they have freezers? Because we get both fresh and we get prepared food. So we're matching the right food to the right place. So the drivers will separate. They don't necessarily sort totally, but they do separate to the different areas for where they know they're going. We're basically a food match.
And this next question is for both of you. To what extent have you worked with farmers directly or like big farms, kind of agricultural, larger scale?
Let me start with that first because it's a short answer. Pretty much none. Our focus is the gardener. It's somebody with a backyard garden. Having said that, we've had occasions where a farmer calls up and says, I have all this food, the price dropped or I can't harvest. May I use you to find a food pantry? The answer is yes. But if they say, I've got this food and you're welcome to it, we don't do that. They should reach out to a gleaning program, Society of St. Andrews, for example, or many others, who will send volunteers. That's not the work that we do. I'm trying to simply reach the one piece of the food system in America, the backyard and community gardener that nobody else has talked to before. That's the piece that we're into.
And same, I think we all can't be everything to everyone, but it's good to learn who else is out there so we can do some recommendations, but you don't want to stay too far off your mission because they're pretty big already.
Okay, thank you. And Beth, the next question is for you. Who or what was the model for your organization?
Well, I saw one called Waste Not down in Arizona. My sister and daughter lived down there, and I went to visit, and my sister's best friend was the ED for probably 15 years, and I talked to her for about 2 years when I was thinking about it and started asking around town to see if anybody was doing it here, and they were not. And so they had been around, I think they've had their 30-something anniversary, and Judy, who came up from there, she said they had been around when she started there 19 to 20 years, and they just had 4 trucks at that time, and we're at 4 trucks now, so I don't know, what does that say? So, yeah, Waste Not, Arizona.
Sorry. Gary, I think that this question is probably mostly for you, but do you have any kind of sense about how much food waste is accelerated by fall frost?
By what?
By fall frost. So whatever's left in the garden, and then the frost comes and it can kill some plants if they're not plucked in time.
I've never been asked the question, and I don't know the answer, but I know it's not zero because my own garden has been the victim of that. I wake up, where I live in New Jersey is in the mountains, and I'm on the downside of a hill, so cold air settles. It's called a frost pocket. And so the Weather Channel says the temperature is going to be 39 degrees or 42 degrees, but my plants have said, no, it got down to 31. And so I don't know how much, but there's going to be loss. I mean, there's no doubt about it. This is nothing that you've done deliberately, and certainly nothing you could have done anything about. I'm asking people to deal with what they can do something with, but if weather hits you, and out here you have it happening all the time, whatever, it's tornadoes or whatever, that's way beyond your control. But the things you can control is what you should be acting on.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great, thank you. We have time for 1 or 2 more questions. Beth, what is the most common item that you see donated after food? Or, I'm sorry, after bread?
Good. I did catch that after bread because that is. We have in our charts kind of show that it's the produce, and that varies depending on time of year. Sometimes we get a lot of apples or pallets of bananas, or when the potatoes all come in. And what's interesting about that is when we go to take it to different pantries, and they know what days we're coming, but sometimes, evidently, our food bank or a lot of other places get the same glut at the same time. So usually they're looking for it, but all of a sudden, everybody has a ton of it. And so then it's finding new places for it.
Yeah, let me add something to that. I think it's really important. Different plants grow and are harvested at different times in the year. What we have gotten away from is taking advantage of those surges when the potatoes are ready, the tomatoes are ready. We expect if I want a peach in January, I'll have a peach in January. But if we shifted our eating a bit to more coincide with the agricultural cycle of where we were, there'd be less food waste, we'd be better nourished, and we'd be in sync with, this is how our great-grandparents and further back lived. When the food was there, they used it.
Okay, great, thank you. This is going to be our last question of the evening. And it is for both of you. So a lot of what we've talked tonight is fixing the gap between food waste and hunger. But beyond that, how do you see your work relating to food waste and health?
Let me start with that. First of all, anytime fresh food gets to people who don't have fresh food, it immediately impacts their health. There's no question about it. And thank you for the question. Monday, this came in the mail. This is the State of Obesity, Better Policies for a Healthy America for 2019 from the Trust for America's Health. I get this every year. It's a study on updates of stuff. And I was going to read one number to you when I did my presentation, so I'm going to do it now. This breaks out the statistics on obesity, diabetes, and other issues on a state-by-state basis. So here in Nebraska, 68.9% of people are either obese or overweight. That's a BMI 25 or higher. And believe me, this is not the worst state. It's not good, but there are states far worse than this. This is a major problem here because the same thing goes when you go to the diabetes in this state. Almost 10% of the adults have diabetes. We have a whole host of issues, obesity, diabetes, hypertension, and on and on and on, that are diet impacted. And the more that people, those who need a food pantry and those who just go shopping for themselves, the more they have access to and take advantage of healthier food, the healthier the community is, the healthier the country is, the healthier obviously they are. So the impact is huge. But this is the one thing that I think we individually can all solve. I can't keep myself from getting certain problems if my body decides to do it, but I can choose to eat healthier. The problem is if you go to a food pantry, you don't have the choice. You go to a food pantry, it's just processed food. That's not your choice. And that's where the community, the gardeners can step in, or programs can step in with rescued food to make that healthier food available. Ultimately, the people and the planet benefit from that.
You know, the health issue, and part of it is, I don't know why we can't get them to cut down on how much bread is, you know, putting bread out at tables and bread. Anyway, I just see that there are a lot more opportunities out there to get more food to more people. I'm trying to explore even outside of pantries. There are a lot of people that don't even qualify for pantries. And then our great pantries that are here, we run into a problem that if it's a school closed day because of weather, now we don't want our trucks and drivers to go out if it's not safe, but a lot of times it's safe. The pantries all close. Now where do we take the food? We go to a lot of other places, but we need big unloads because those are take it. So I'm, you know, trying to stay open to, and then some people that just make above that line, but they have a lot of kids. I think a mutual friend of ours said, a guy that worked at her, in her buildings and stuff, he has all these kids, he makes just that much too much, but he needs food, good healthy food. So always looking at ways to explore how to get more of this good healthy food to more people in more ways.
Can I add one thing? There are millions of Americans who are dealing with chronic diseases, diabetics, people living with HIV, AIDS, or whatever. They're struggling already to try to deal with their illness. The more that we can make fresh food available to them, the easier the struggle is, the better the chance that whatever the medical care they're getting will be complemented by an improvement in the quality of the nutrition they have.
Okay, thank you. That was our last question for tonight. So thank you everyone for coming. Thank you to our speakers, our donors, our staff members.